Welcome everyone to our session. I'm Wesley Holden, the Community Manager here at Totara Learning, and today we're going to be talking through site-level user management. So the couple of things we're going to cover for this session is pretty similar to the other sessions we do around the product. We're going to talk through terminology relating to site-level user management. We are going to look at the functionality itself, and in this case, we're actually going to do a deep dive into setting up and using roles, permissions, and capabilities within Totara at a site-wide level. Uh, there's a lot that I could cover for site-level user management, and so that was the piece that typically has the most questions that come up, like in support and things like that, and on the forums. So we'll focus on that for today, but I'm also going to show you share a link for the course on the community site that does delve into other areas of user management, including things like site authentication, user enrollment, and some more deep dive into roles and permissions as well. So let's talk through those first couple of terms. And again, please feel free to jump in anytime with questions, and I'll cover them as we go or get them at the end. So there's basically three terms that we're going to use, and there's a couple more that will come up in the context of conversation. But the three main ones that we're going to deal with today are roles, capabilities, and permissions. So with a user on a Totara site, they're going to have a role or many roles within the site. They are a learner taking a course, they are a trainer or educator, they are an editing trainer or maybe an instructional designer who's actually building content. They might be an administrator, so someone who's actually configuring the site and maintaining user accounts and things like that. So there are lots of different roles that someone can have in relationship to the Totara site. So the role in this context is literally the role you're given on the site or roles you're given. And we'll talk through the list of what those look like when you get a system out of the box. Capability is the things that someone with a role can do, or not do, for that matter. A capability is just really about those things that, pieces of functionality on the site that people could access. So for example, with a quiz, capabilities would include being able to view a quiz, being able to edit it, being able to add questions to it, being able to grade it. So those are just four different capabilities with that tool. A permission is whether someone is allowed or denied access to that capability. So am I allowed to view the quiz? Am I allowed to edit it or change questions or anything like that? So all of those pieces would be the permissions I have with regard to each capability. So when you set up a Totara site, there are already a set of roles that come by default with the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump in and I'm going to show you those here in a minute. And we're just going to talk through a little bit of process. So for this session, we're entirely focusing from the admin's perspective on the system. We're going to look at the existing roles in the system. We're going to look at how to create a new role or how to update an existing role or why you might want to do one versus the other. So we'll talk a little bit about best practices. We're going to talk about what it looks like to choose permission levels for capabilities and sort of the impact that can have on your site. And then we're going to assign a role to a user at a site-wide level. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to go ahead and pop out of the PowerPoint because most of this presentation is going to be in the software itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in as an administrator. And this is just my little local site. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way here. So coming in as a site administrator, I'm going to have full access to do whatever I want essentially on this site. So that's something to keep in mind, is that I'm a full administrator. You may have access to a site where you're not necessarily a full admin, but you may have some management capabilities. So just know that you may not see everything that I see because of those capability permissions. The other piece is we are looking at a Totara Learn 12 site. The information I'm going to give you today also pertains to previous versions of the software. The way that the roles and permission system works across different versions hasn't changed. The only thing that's really changed is, if we've introduced a new feature, there may be some new capabilities relating to that feature that are available. The one other obvious thing is how you actually get to this. So in my case, all I've done is log in so far. Because I'm on Totara Learn 12 and I have the new admin panel turned on, my site administration tools are up here behind the gear icon. If you're using a previous release or potentially a release of 12 that doesn't have that panel turned on, you'll come down to the site administration block and you'll see another set of settings here for site administration. So in that case, you'll go under site administration and then under users, and then you'll see the options that I'm going to talk through. So I'm going to go from my gear icon into permissions. So here's my little permissions block, and there's a lot of different things we can do, honestly, with users at a site-wide level. We're not going to talk through all of this today, just because, honestly, it would take more than a half hour. So let's go and look at roles in the system. So what I have is a system that's essentially out of the box. I'm going to go ahead and delete this role just because I set it up earlier, but I do want you to see what you get when you just turn on a system. So I get rid of my HR manager here. That's actually the one I created for the earlier presentation, so we'll be creating it again. So here's the list of roles that are available in the system. One that we aren't seeing here is site administrator. That's because site administrator is not a role that can be adjusted. If you're a site administrator, you sort of have permission to do everything, and that can't be taken away unless we unassign that site administrator role from you. We can't adjust the site administrator role. What we can do, however, is if we need someone who is like mostly a site admin, but maybe they're only allowed to access certain areas, we can use the site manager role, which is similar to admin, just a little bit reduced in terms of what capabilities they have access to. But we could also create a brand new role if we want to, and populate it with those capabilities and permissions that apply to them, to the people that would be assigned that role. So with these roles, these are all ones that can be available at different contexts. So the different contexts would refer to, and actually let me click into Site Manager and show you, because I think that helps rather than just talking about it. With each role, there are contexts where it can be assigned. So these are sort of like areas of the system that these would apply to. So that could include the system level. So this would be allowing me to access like configuration options at a site-wide level. We have the user context. So this would be if I'm assigning permissions that give one user some access to another user's profile. Now, let me put that into a little bit more context. That's a permission that's used in, I'm trying to decide how I want to put this. You don't necessarily need to turn that permission on to give someone access to maintain other users' profiles. So like a site manager may still be able to access user accounts even if they don't have this permission. What that's going to do, though, is allow us to say this person is a this in relationship to this other person, like similar to like a staff manager where they have some rights over the other user's account to like assign them learning or things like that. We also have things that come more at our course and category level. So course category level, if I have an entire category of courses, for example, everything in relating to first aid, and I have someone who's a trainer for all of those first aid courses, I can actually assign that role potentially at a category level instead of at an individual course level where I'd have to do it 20 times. Program and course level, these are related to those types of learning objects. Activity module, this is being able to actually assign a role with regard to a specific activity module, so like within a course page or to a specific block. So for example, maybe I am a TA, like a teaching assistant, and I shouldn't have access to manage the whole course page, but I should have access to manage content within certain areas. Like maybe I'm the one who's allowed to go and grade forum posts, mark them or rate them. I might be allowed to go and grade quizzes, that kind of thing. So what I can do is allow someone to have bumped up permissions in certain areas. And to do that, I would give that, assign that, make that context type assignable. So I'd say, if you're an editing trainer, you could be an editing trainer just with regard to specific activity modules. Coming on down, so looking at this role, there are a few pieces. We need to give it a name, we can give it a description. There's this piece called a role archetype. So when we are setting up roles in the system, we don't have to make them all up from scratch. There are the default ones that come out of the box, the ones that we talked through a minute ago, and you have a couple of options. So if, for example, I wanted to take this site manager role and I wanted to change it, let's say that I wanted to reduce the amount of permissions someone assigned this role would have. I could come in and change this role and actually change the capabilities permissions the person has. I can come in and deny them access to certain things. Or I can create a new role that actually encapsulates all of the pieces that that person should be able to do, or that that type of person should be able to do. Because what we want to make sure we do is set up roles that are, I don't want to say generic, but are like general enough that they can apply to lots of users. Like I don't want to have to, I don't like seeing systems where I come in and like these custom roles have been set up for all of these different users. And the reason for that is it just makes maintenance a lot harder, over time. And especially if you end up handing off the site to somebody else, if you have a new learning LMS admin come in, they now have these 20 different roles to figure out. And if someone says, well, I can't access this thing, why can't I access it? It's rather than just being able to go, oh, well, you're a learner, so you don't get access to that. They have to say, oh, well, let me look through these custom roles, see which ones you have, and decide if one of the roles is maybe impacting another one in a negative way, like that kind of thing. That being said, you can set up as many roles in your system as you need. So it's all about fitting business case. We give you the tools and you decide how that's going to apply best to your business cases. So a couple other things you can do. You can allow one role to assign other people roles. So I can say, this person can make other people site managers or course creators or editing trainers, etc. We can allow role overrides. So this role is allowed to override other people's roles if they are at these levels. So I can say, normally you're a this. I can bump up your permission a little bit and make you a something else for a little while. And we can also allow role switches. So this means that I get to see the system from another type of user's perspective. So let's say I'm doing tech support and my trainer says, well, I'm looking at this, but I can't actually see the quiz and I don't know why. We can come in and say, okay, let me log in, switch over to the trainer role and look at it from your perspective. And then the person can easily switch back to their own normal perspective from their role. Role risks, this is where we get into sort of the pros and cons. We do have some risks that come up with particular permissions. So for example, a site manager is able to add, update, and delete users. So there's a privacy risk that they could see user profile information. There's a spam risk that they can go in and message anybody they want to. There's a configuration risk because in this case, they have permissions to actually go and manage site permissions as well. There's a data loss risk because they could delete things. And there's an XSS risk because, again, they could be putting in spam or dropping in scripts or things like that on the site into HTML areas. So it's up to you to decide. It's a balance. There's going to be risks if the person is given permissions to do certain things. Then down here we have our capabilities. So these are the things that someone can do. And these are generally broken up by what they apply to. So is it a system level thing? Is it related to a particular activity, or is it an overall course capability? The example I like to use is HR import. So HR import is that tool that allows you to import user accounts and competencies now in 12 and positions and organizations. So who is allowed to have access to this? Who can use this tool? So in this case, a site manager is allowed to basically do all of the things with HR import. That does come with some risks, but when we assign that role to someone, we're making sure that they know, hey, be careful because this is what can happen. So if you need to come and just tweak permissions, you can come in and search. So if, for example, I want to give them some permissions around certifications, I could just start typing and filter and say, maybe I want to allow this person to configure certifications. That's great. We can go ahead and give them permission to do that. And to give them permission, all I do is turn on edit within this role. So I'll just say edit. And I can go in and do things like changing the names, changing the context, going through and tweaking all these pieces. So as you're building out your roles, you do have the ability to play around with it, come back and fix things if they don't quite work the way you expect them to. I highly recommend creating yourself like a secondary account, like a test account for your site. So you can assign that test account a permission, go in, or excuse me, a role, go in with that role, see if it does the things you'd expect it to. If not, you can come back and tweak it. You can do that without impacting your own account. But let's go back one level now. So we're looking at the different roles that are available. And let's say that someone comes to me and says, okay, John from HR needs to be able to import users into the system. He doesn't need to be able to manually access them. He's just going to bring a spreadsheet that he wants to upload into the system, once a week, let's say, or every day, however often it makes sense to do it. So we have a couple of options. Do we create a brand new role from scratch that gives him just the permissions he needs? Do we adjust an existing permission to make it fit him? Or do we do a combination of those things? Create a new role, but base it on an existing one. So any of those options could be correct. None of them are better than the others. It's up to you again and your business rules to say, okay, well, we already know that John is also a learner on the system because he has coursework he has to take. And he's also a trainer on the system because he happens to be the one who delivers first aid courses. So we know that anytime somebody has an account that's created and they're able to log in, they automatically get one level of permissions through the role authenticated user. You log in, boom, you're an authenticated user. And you have all of the permissions that go with that. Permissions that go with authenticated user are going to be things like seeing menus, seeing your profile, seeing notifications, stuff that relates to you. But it's pretty minimal. It's literally like you're allowed to log in, and now this is the stuff you can see. On top of that, we also want to give him permissions around HR import. So what I'm going to do, because none of these roles, like site manager, gives way too many permissions. Course creator, completely different context, doesn't actually help me with what I want for him. And the rest of the roles don't really apply for him either. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new role. And I can either inherit an existing role, so one that I've tweaked. I can base it on an archetype, a role archetype. So role archetypes are literally what the roles look like out of the box, remembering that I could have tweaked the site manager role from the way it was set up out of the box. So I could choose one of these to inherit if I want to. If you know someone else with a Totara site and they have a role set up that you think is amazing and would be really helpful for your site, they can export it and you can actually import that preset into your site as well. I'm going to go with no role and keep mine focused. So I'm going to go and give it a name of HR Manager. There's also a full name where you can give it a bit of a longer name if you choose to. We can give it a description, really helpful for other admins to know why you created this role and what it's for. Also good for creating, for leaving yourself reminders as to why you created this role. Because 10 years down the road, you might come back and go, oh, I don't remember why I made this one. Or if you have a new admin come in, they might be like, well, when would I use this versus this other one? This is the place to include that information. Down below, again, we could choose our role archetype if we want something to base it on. We choose the context types where this will be can be assigned to someone. So in this case, this is going to be a system level role. It doesn't make sense at a course level or a block level or anything like that because our permissions are all going to be that system level tool of HR import. I can allow the person to do other fancy things, allowing them to assign roles to other people, override other roles. I'm not going to give that to this role because this role literally just needs to be able to go and import data into the system. I go and I'm going to filter. I'm going to grab HR import. And what I'm going to do is go through, and in this case, I'm just going to check allow for all of these capabilities that I want him to have access to. I say him, but really I'm more generically meaning anybody who needs to have this role. So those are the only things that really apply in this case. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to save my changes. I'm going to get this little chat window out of the way. There we go. And I'm going to create this new role. So you can see with the permission, now I have that allow set. Now, if I want to, I can assign this to someone. So let's go assign system roles. And I'm going to say, and so I've created this role. Now let's make John our HR manager. So I can click and I can choose them from a list. I could choose multiple people, like maybe John and Irene work together. And so I can add them both. And now when those users log in, they'll see that additional set of permissions to get into HR import. Now, again, I highly recommend that you set up a test account, assign it that role, and log in with it, because you might log in and realize, like, oh, I forgot to show them the menu option that allows them to actually get there. Or, oh, I didn't actually let them see, have access to the logs or have access to some piece of this that would have been really helpful for them to see. So just remember that, it's an experiment. Try it out. Make sure that it works the way you expect it to before you turn it over to someone. So some other things that you can do along with creating those new roles, you can always come back and tweak them, if they don't quite work. We can also go through and do things like checking system permissions. So if we need to check and see, if I'm like, oh, I know John had a bunch of permissions in the system, but I don't remember what they were, I can actually go and check his permissions and see, based on the multiple roles he has in the system, what he's allowed to do. So in this case, he just has 2, but if he was like a trainer in a course and a learner in a course, we'd be able to see all of those permissions that he's been granted. Let me just click through a little bit. There's some other pieces around default role settings and some capabilities and stuff like that. I'm not going to get too far into those because honestly, it's just digging more into the same concepts, but hopefully you get the idea of what you're able to do now when it comes to roles and permissions within the system. I'm going to back out a little bit, and if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A or in the chat. And I'm going to pop back over actually to my PowerPoint. There's a couple pieces I want to talk to you about. Let me make sure I actually turned off my... So there's a few different resources if you need more help with this, either with this particular piece or just in general. You can come to Totara.community. That's our community site where you can come and talk to other Totara users, talk to Totara partners, also the whole Totara team, support team, developers, community team. We're all on the community site and we answer questions. Whether it's a best practice or, hey, I'm trying to set this thing up and I can't figure out how it works. That's great. Come to us with it. Twitter.help is the documentation site, so you get access to all of the help docs. TotaraLearning.com is our general website. A couple of great things you can find there are things like events, dates for user conferences, as well as a ton of white papers are out there now that walk through, or excuse me, case studies that walk through how other people are using the system. So if you're looking for ideas, that can be really helpful. And then the demo.totaralearning.com site is our demo site. So it's just a live sandbox of the system with a bunch of data in it. So you can go in and kind of play around with things. And it's a really good place that if you want to go play with roles and permissions and kind of see what you can do, it's a great place to try things out because it automatically resets every 48 hours. So there's more to know about site level user management, more than we could get into possibly today. So there is a course. If you go to Totara.community and go under this Academy menu option, you'll see a couple different versions of the software listed there. So you can choose your version and then you can come in and do the coursework. All coursework is self-paced, free to access. So you can come in and, for example, with site level user management, it's also going to get into things like authentication. So literally how you get users onto the site. What are the methods of enrolling them and actually getting them access to coursework? It also digs into this roles and permissions piece, as well as showing you how to override permissions for users. So there's a lot more there that can be helpful. And if you are interested and local-ish, we have a couple of upcoming user conferences. So in March, meeting up in APAC. In May, we're going to be in EMEA. And then in August, we're going to be in New Zealand. And so you can join us there on site. We'll be meeting partners and subscribers, and parts of the team will be there. So you'll be able to join us and get to know the product better. And again, if you go to Totara.community, you'll see a conferences area, so you can go and sign up. There's registration links for all 3 of those. Coming up tomorrow, just in terms of other webinars that are coming up, we've got, and if you don't already know, we do an awards series every year for people that have choose to submit their projects. So this year, our best compliance project was through the NHS with the partner Chambray Learning Solutions. And so they're going to be talking about their talking about their project along with Emma from the NHS. Talking about compliance and how they won the best compliance project of the year last year. So you can go to the community site and register for that in the upcoming webinars area. Coming up, more importantly for you guys, March 13th and 14th, there's going to be a Q&A session. So 30 minutes of site level user management. Ask whatever questions you want around authentication, around user enrollment, around user roles and permissions like we talked about today. If you're working on the coursework, you can ask questions from the course. So come join us for those. If you go to the upcoming webinars area, you'll be able to you'll be able to register for those sessions as well. And it's literally just 30 minutes to ask questions. That's all we have time for today. Join us at the Totara.community site if you haven't already. If you have questions, you're welcome to drop me an email, wesley.holden@totaralearning.com. You can also hit me on Twitter at Wesley Learns. Thank you all so much for your time and attention. I'm going to hang out for just a couple of more minutes in case anybody does have any questions. If not, feel free to head off into the rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.